evening, friends. It gives an immense pleasure on a weekend. A lawyer generally tends to relax, but sometimes when the good speakers come on the platform, they also try to negotiate within the time space of the participants who want to learn. And they say when you try to give better knowledge, then even the relaxation to the mind gives a better food for thought and better relaxation. And when you have two speakers who are not only known within their states, but pan India and pan world, then I can only see that people just keep on not barging in, but I can definitely say that a lot of fence sitters who will watch us live on the Facebook, since we are going live shortly. Amongst us, we have Mr. JP Sain, a senior advocate and a close friend of ours. And I can also share that when I learned mediation in Punjab and Haryana High Court, I worked under his tutelage. And that gives a more facet while introducing a speaker to the effect stating therein that there couldn't be a better occasion that once you can tell your guru that I'm introducing you. It is just like saying to the sunshine that you give a better sunshine to the people. And same way, a lot of mediators have been trained from Mr. Jawad, and that is why what we call normally taught and taught. So taught is trainers or trainers, and they are being taught by the trainers. So once amongst us, we have also Mr. Jawad, those who have been connected with Beyond Law CLC. They know that Mr. Jawad, as they say, same with Mr. Sain, they are rare species, and rare species are very difficult to be brought together. But once they see, I can definitely say that the art of negotiation and mediation to be learned from that is also the way we did. The exciting fact was I never had to negotiate with them, kindly do come. As an elder brothers, they readily latched upon. They said that we will share it on your platform, though it's a weekend. And Mr. Jawad, who is also a trained mediator and a known name, and he also runs a mediation training. And we have all seen that while he was connected with us, the way that the insights which he gave, probably what I learned from him, the communication, is probably I will take after this session, when the session is over privately, whether I could communicate in a slightly different manner than what I was introducing in the different earlier two rounds. So that at least he can say that his under his tutelage also there was some difference. Lest people say that Mr. Chatrat is introducing the speakers and bringing them on the platform, but he is himself not learning that. Be that as it may, I will ask Mr. Sain to put the things forward, and then Mr. Jawad will take. And thereafter, we will take the question and answers after around 45-50 minutes. That can be posted on the chat box. Over to you, Mr. Sain, and we are delighted to have you on the platform, along with Mr. Jawad.
Thank you, Vikas, for being so lavish, with your praises. I don't know. I mean, Jawad would be one with me as to how much of it we deserve. Well, you rightly put it. So far as we are concerned, we are soft bargainers. Don't worry about that. And then when it comes to, we've done a little bit of change because I thought we should make it more interactive. So between Jawad and I, we decided that we will interact with each other as we introduce the subject to you people. If that is okay with you?
No, it's fine.
Okay, Jawad, up to you.
Okay, JP, thank you so much. Thank you, Vikash, as JP said, for the very lavish compliment that you have paid us. And also calling us as a rare species. I think we belong to the new species, which is called as Homo mediations, not Homo sapiens. So on that note, as JP said, we thought we will make it interactive between the two of us first, before we open up for the audience to question us on whatever doubts they may have. If those doubts are not clarified in the course of our discussion. So I'm going to start with my question to JP first, because I want JP to throw light on the introductory part of what we need to discuss. So my question to you, JP, is looking at it from the mediation context, from the mediation perspective, how would you define negotiation? And what are the skills that a mediator should possess to facilitate negotiation in a mediation?
Now let's, the simplest definition that I can, give to mediation, that mediation is a facilitated negotiation. Now, but sometimes we loosely, use bargaining and negotiation interchangeably. While bargaining is about economic benefit, who gets a better deal in terms of exchange of value. By redefining the terms offered by the other party. Now, there are two ways of approaching any negotiation. One is position-based approach, and the other is problem-solving approach. The mediator facilitates the parties in their negotiation by shifting them from position-based approach to problem-solving approach. Now, to do that, he needs negotiation and communication skills. Now, communication skills help him to identify the interests and needs of the disputants, and negotiation skills helps him to move parties from their positions to their interests and needs. Now, how does he do that? The mechanism, it has a, beautiful, if I look at negotiation today, like after having been part of this mediation team for nearly 14 years now, 2006 we started it. It has a great mechanism. Now, in every negotiation, it is important to start with building rapport. Now, ordinarily when parties walk into a negotiation room, we straight away start about, acha, what is the issue? Let's talk about what the problem is. But experts tell you, it's better to engage in a small talk, which has its benefits. How did you find the weather? Was the travel good? You come here, which college? Any kind of small talk. It helps parties to get to know each other before you actually begin negotiations. And they say it's a very valuable skill which is very hard to master, building rapport with the parties. In the first instance, it's important. The skill which all mediators must acquire is to build rapport. Then comes building trust. Now, when we talk about building trust, that can be done by sharing information with the other side without divulging information which will compromise your position. When you show your intention to settle, in turn, the other side will also do the same. And they will express genuine interest in resolving the dispute. By forging a connect on trust, it results into a productive dialogue. And you are able to explore opportunities for mutual gain. So it is important, first, you must build rapport and then build trust before you actually get into the negotiation mode. The other aspect which fosters respect is listening actively. When I talk about listening actively, we should listen not with the intent to what we are going to say next. It's important that you should give 100% to what the other person is saying. And that you can do by empathetic listening. And that empathetic listening comes when you paraphrase what you've heard, and which will help you to check your understanding of what the other person said. And the other person understands that actually you are also trying to understand what the other person is trying to communicate to you. Then what is important in empathetic listening is acknowledgement of their feelings. When you acknowledge, you convey your own message of encouragement and respect. So therefore, build rapport, build trust, and listen actively. You see, negotiation is a two-way street. It is a process that involves not just claiming value, but also creating value. So express genuine interest in understanding the other side's priorities. And to do that, what you need to do is to ask appropriate and good questions. Now, how do you ask good questions? You know, there's a funnel approach which you can adopt. First is your wide, you know, the open-ended questions which get you a wide range of information. So like a funnel, after you've had all that information available with you, then you can narrow down your, you know, questions to specifics. And those we call clarificatory questions. And after you have clarifications with you, you can ask the close-ended questions, which are to get an answer in yes or no. Have I understood this correctly? You'll say yes or no. So start with your open-ended questions, come down to narrow-ended questions, and then come to your closed-ended question. So it's in the nature of a funnel. A larger amount of information, then a smaller area in which you work on by clarificatory questions, and then come to your narrow question. So this is how you get to, you know, see what the priorities of the other side are. Then one very important aspect is to tell you is search for smart trade-offs. Now, what are these trade-offs that you can do? You know, distributive negotiation are usually where parties are usually stuck making demands and concessions. And this is exactly what happens when parties move in. You know, and you'll find mostly when parties move in, they say, "Mujhe ye chahiye, mujhe iska answer ye chahiye." You know, so therefore they're looking for in the beginning stage, either they are demanding something or they are looking for concessions. And that also they do it on a single issue. Mostly you will find even in matrimonial disputes, how much money. It all ultimately boils down to a price. They do not get into a problem-solving mode. While problem-solving, you know, negotiation raises multiple issues. You try to identify issues that your counterparts cares deeply about, that you value less. Something which is very important for him, for you it may not have so much of value. Then what do? You trade off what you do not value so much to something which he values most, and give up your position on that so that he gets what he wants, and you can then look for something which he values less and you can ask for and which you value more. So these are smart trade-offs that happen. And you know, when you're doing these trade-offs, there's an important, you know, aspect that I learned. Ordinarily, like, you know, when we are doing our negotiation trainings also, we say look for common interests. But for trade-offs, you have to look for uncommon grounds. Because that's where you will find which is something which he values more, because that's something which is more important for him. So that's something which is important for him and not important for me. These are uncommon grounds. So that is where your trade-offs will happen. So you have to look for uncommon grounds instead of looking for common interests. Then what is important is you need to analyze and cultivate your partner. See, preparation is the most important part before you sit down on a negotiating table. If you have not thought carefully about what you will do if you fail to reach an agreement, you are negotiating with your eyes closed. See, you may accept an agreement which you will regret later, or which you should have rejected, or reject an offer which you should have accepted and later regret, because you have not prepared yourself. In both, they say in problem solving and adversarial bargaining, your best source of power is your ability and willingness to walk away and take another deal. That's your partner, that's your power. Even in adversarial situations where I don't need to bargain with you and I can, you know, get my same interest, satisfy my interest by not being on the table, but look for a deal somewhere else. You see how it works. There are two ways, you know, very important aspects in so far as mediation negotiation is concerned. One is called ZOPA. zone of possible agreement. For example, let's say there's a buyer and there is a seller. For the buyer, there is the highest aspect which he is willing to pay for an article. And for a seller, this is the minimum. So these are reserve prices both have for themselves. The highest I can go, man says the minimum I can go. So between the minimum and the maximum, there is a zone of possible agreement, which is called ZOPA. You may, of course, aspire for something more than your ZOPA, which yes, but those are referred to as ZONA, which this is zone of no agreement, because you're not likely to go beyond your ZOPA. So you try and bargain between your ZOPA. Now, ordinarily, what do? Whenever we are about to reach an agreement, we are so happy with it that we want to close the settlement. Now, this is somewhere most of us don't do that. And I was, very, very happy when you mentioned that, Jawad, about Thompson's pyramid model.
Yeah.
There are 3 stages of actually, there are 3 levels in which you can bring about a negotiation. Ordinarily, we are stuck at level 1. Because once an agreement happens which is better than my partner, I'm so happy that I want to now close it. I don't look for the level 2 agreement, which is there a better way of improving that settlement? And then after the level 2, there's one more level, which is Pareto legal, which they say which is the highest. And in terms of economics, they say, in case if I was to still offer something more to another party, is going to harm the other party. So that's the maximum, the highest that you can reach. But question is, most of us don't do that. Most of us negotiate at level 1. And let me tell you, I am reminded of words of, Roger Fisher and William Ury. I want to just quote that. He says, in most people's mind, inventing simply is not part of their negotiation process. People see their job as narrowing the gap between positions, not broadening the options available. They tend to think we are having a hard time enough agreeing as it is. The last thing we need is a bunch of different ideas. By looking from the outset for the single best answer, you are likely to short circuit a wiser decision-making process in which you select from a large number of possible answers. See, therefore, sometimes what happens? Purpose of level 1, level 2, level 3 negotiation is that you don't leave anything back on the table. You don't regret it. We could have taken it, slightly higher. Maybe I could have had a better deal. Yeah. So therefore, he says, once you reach level 1, it is time for you to examine. After you've reached a settlement stage, is there a better? Can I take it higher? Can we have a better deal in the whole bargain? And once we reach level 2, is it still better? Can we go higher than this? So therefore, it's a very, very dynamic process so far as negotiation and mediation is concerned. And therefore, I feel there's lots to learn. I mean, I remember that saying which said that, I have, the more I learn, the more I come to know how little I know.
How little I know.
So therefore, this is what the whole mediation process is about. And now that we are here, Jawad, having heard what I said, and having taken you to Roger and Ury, Roger Fisher and Ury. Now, tell me, what is the style of negotiation that would be most appropriate for a mediator to adopt? And what are the highlights of this style of negotiation? It takes me to getting to yes. And I'm sure you are an expert on that to tell us.
Well, yes. Actually, you have touched the most crucial aspects of what I was going to talk about, JP. So that makes my job much easier, actually. So, I mean, as you rightly said, Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury is the Bible for any negotiator or professional mediator. So without reading that, you really can't become a mediator or a negotiator. So now, if you look at, as you rightly pointed out, if you look at most negotiations, how most negotiations take place, whether it's a contract or, a family dispute or even, for example, a peace settlement between different countries, what we see normally is positional bargaining, which you have pointed out. We bargain from our positions. So we take a position, we argue for it, we make concessions to reach a compromise. So that is what we normally do. Now in this, Roger Fisher and William Ury point out that there are two ways of this positional bargaining that takes place. One is the soft bargaining, where the participants are friends. Like JP and I are bargaining about something. One of us is going to be, more accommodating, more giving in easily. We are friends. The goal is to reach an agreement. And more important is the relationship. So to cultivate the relationship, we will make concessions generously. We will be soft on each other. We won't be very harsh on each other. Trust comes very easily. We would be willing to change our position very easily. We would not be very fixed hard on our respective positions. We will make offers readily. We will disclose the bottom line, like we will not hide that this is what I'm expecting. Like if I want to sell you a car, I would say that JP, look, in the market, I would have quoted 12 lakhs, but since you're buying it, maybe 9 lakhs, So I would disclose my bottom line very easily to you. And, I would accept one-sided loss, that I would be willing to forego the 3 lakhs, which I may normally get in the market, because for me, JP is a very important friend. So therefore, I want him to have my car. I would much rather that he has my car rather than somebody else. And there's always the search for a single answer, a single solution, the one that would be acceptable to the other person. Whether it is acceptable to me or not, it should be acceptable to the other person. And there is always, if there is some pressure, we yield to the pressure, and we insist on an agreement. Now, the opposite of that is the hard bargaining, where, it's exactly the opposite. We are adversaries. Okay. The goal is to win. Okay. So victory is the main target. Demand concessions as a condition for the relationship. We are hard on the problem and on the people. On the other side also, we get entrenched in our positions. We refuse to move from our positions. Threats. If you don't agree to this, I'm going to walk out. If you don't agree to this, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to send it to somebody else. Okay. Mislead on the bottom line. Like say, my car, I want 15 lakhs for it, but my bottom line would be probably 12 lakhs. Okay. So search for a single answer that would be acceptable to me, not to you. So that would be one. Try to contest, win a contest of will, apply a lot of pressure. Now, if you see from, I think most mediators are acquainted with the Thomas Kilmann conflict instrument, right? We have different styles of dealing with conflict, where we have, the avoiding type, we have the accommodating type, we have the compromising type, we have the competing type, and we have the collaborating type. In this kind of negotiation would fit into accommodating, compromising, or competing. Okay. Now here is where Roger Fisher and William Ury walk in, and they say that the game of negotiation takes place at two different levels. One level is the substantive issue. Okay, so what is going to be the price? That will be the one level. The other, which is usually implicit, is on the procedure, on how are we going to deal with this substantive issue. That is, what is the procedure how are we going to negotiate with each other? What is going to be our method of negotiation or our style of negotiation? So now what they say is, for any method of negotiation, if you're going to evaluate a method of negotiation, it should satisfy three important criteria. One, it should produce a wise agreement, WISE, not VISCE, wise, WISE, wise agreement. What they mean by wise agreement is it should meet the legitimate interests of each side to the maximum extent possible. It should resolve the conflict fairly, and it should also be a durable one, something that would last, okay, that would be sustainable. And it should also take the community interests into consideration. Now, to the question, which is the best way of bargaining, whether it is soft or hard, They say it is neither. Okay. So what they say is change the game. And they talk about, an alternative method, which is called as principled negotiation. Okay. So, or negotiation on the merits. And they highlight, 4 points that need to be taken into consideration when you're negotiating. So what are those 4 points? The first one is separate the people from the problem. Now, usually what happens is we are very strong creatures, or we are creatures of strong emotions. Okay. And we have, radically different perceptions of things. Okay. Where what I see, you may not see, what you see, I may not see, because our perceptions differ. And that's another topic in itself, because, how our perceptions come to be defined. Like, what are the factors that go into it? Our values, our biases, the way we grow up, what kind of environment we grow up in. These are all factors which govern our perceptions. So we may have radically different perceptions. So we see the issue differently. Okay, we are not good communicators. And that is where you pointed out that a mediator, needs to have those communication skills. But people may not have good communication skills. They may not know how to communicate properly or clearly. Now, what happens is, the emotions, typically, they get entangled with the objective merits of the problem. And what happens is, the ego comes in, and people start identifying themselves with their positions. So the difference between an issue being, something different from you becomes blurred. So if you and I are indulging in any kind of negotiation, I will identify you as the problem and you will identify me as the problem. That's what we discussed in the hard bargaining style. So the problem is not something that needs to be sorted out by both of us. So a very beautiful example of this can be, like what we normally, supposing I ask a question that if 2 people are standing on 2 different cliffs and there is a huge, chasm between them, what would the normal approach of any person be? It would be that, okay, look, we need to put a kind of a bridge in between and help them to cross over each other. But that is where, the principled negotiation deals with it in a different way. And a mediator who's skilled in principled negotiation would work with the parties to help them to understand that, look, your perception that you're on 2 opposite sides is completely wrong. You're both on one side, and your problem is to cross this together. So the mediator successfully, what the mediator would do is tell the parties that, look, you too have this problem and you need to work together to resolve it. So that is what we mean by separating the people from the problem. The second thing is, as you said, focus on the interests, what we call the pin pyramid, where, to give again the example of 2 cliffs, people are standing on 2 peaks of the mountain, and 2 different peaks, and there is obviously no meeting point over there at all. So those are their positions. So what happens in that is that it really obscures what they really want, because they're so strong on their positions that it obscures what they really want. So through a process of skillful questioning as to what is important for you, what do you really need? What do you expect out of this? What do you think will be the best outcome for you? What happens if this doesn't work for you? The mediator is able to bring them to focus on their interests. Now, invariably, as you pointed out to the Zopa, when you come down from the position, you're bringing them into that valley where their interests are overlapping, and that is where the Zopa lies, the zone of possible agreement. Because invariably, the interests always keep overlapping. Okay, because the interests might be common interests of the parties. Okay, so they need to resolve this issue, they need to negotiate and come to a conclusion. And that is where, once you focus on the interest, they're able to see that what is important for us. Now, this is where, because I was recently in a training program and we did a demonstration role play where, the thing was the parties came to a settlement and there was a demand that was made. And one of the participants told me that, look, actually so-and-so has lost because she didn't get her demand, what she wanted. I said that's the whole difference between mediation and any other form of dispute resolution. As long as she gets what she needs, she's happy with that, right? All along she was thinking, this is what I want. The moment she realized that this is what I need, which means the mediator has successfully brought her to realize her interests, and that's where she feels that, to meet my interest, this is what I need. So that is where that one aspect comes. Okay. Now the third thing that they pointed out is invent, multiple options, which you also pointed out, level 1, level 2, level 3. Because if you're going to confine yourself to only one solution, as that is the only outcome that is possible and no other outcome is possible, then you're limiting yourself. And if supposing there's no agreement on that, the parties have to walk out of it empty-handed. So what the mediator does is helps the parties to generate multiple options. If this doesn't work, what will? Can this be done in a better way? Can you make your offer a little better than this? How do we improve this? How do we make it, acceptable to you, as workable for you and workable for the other person? What is it that you can live with? Okay, what does satisfy your needs? So when the mediator is able to focus on, help them to generate multiple options, then a lot of, brainstorming happens, and, you weed out all those options that may not sound really good. So sometimes, we always in mediation training, we teach this brainstorming. We give this brainstorming exercise to the participants. We say that, okay, here's the problem, and come up with multiple ideas on how to solve the problem. It might be the most ridiculous thing. The ground rule is nobody will laugh at the most absurd suggestion also. So when you note down all the multiple options that people can come up with, then you start, shortlisting what would be the most workable and what would be good for one party and good for the other party also. And then you're able to narrow down and you're able to agree upon something that would be acceptable to both of them, something that they can both live with. Now, it may not be the same as what they had wanted when the negotiation began. But as long as they're able to live with that, that's fine. Okay. So basically on these 4 principles, I think, the style of negotiation, the principled negotiation style would be, I think, the most appropriate. And that is where this book by Roger Fisher and William Ury becomes very important, because when you read that, they give you different examples and, how you can really work on these 4 points and try to, bring about a settlement. So I hope that answers the question, JP.
Somewhere I feel like, once someone said that, you exactly put it in the right perspective. He says, if I give up a position, if I've asked for 2 crores, at the end of the day, I got 1. Is it a win-win situation? How is it a win-win situation? And you rightly put it that if it satisfies, that one satisfies my interests and needs, good enough.
Yes.
It is, so far as I'm concerned, it's a win-win situation.
Correct.
So yes, it's a question of perspective. You rightly put it.
Yes. And I think that is one huge difference between, mediation and any other dispute resolution process, because whether it is arbitration, whether it is litigation, or whether it is even negotiation, which takes place directly between the parties, it's always based on positions. Because as you rightly pointed out, when you started off, you said that, straight away we jump into what is it that we can do? What is it that you want? What is it that the other person wants? Let's talk about that. There was this very interesting video, an ad actually, which I came across on YouTube, which we normally show in our training programs. My friend Bharat Chakravarti came out with this video. It's where a man is jogging along a mountain path, and he comes to his car and he's trying to do some stretching exercises. And there's a truck driver who's coming and he's having this chocolate. What he does is, when he sees this man, standing in a position where he's stretching, leaning on the car, he just goes there and helps him to, pushes the car over the cliff, thinking that this man wants to push the car over the cliff. Now, that's where I think what you made a very important point is that unless you understand, a mediator understands the whole background, the information, is gathered completely, and the mediator is able to understand what the parties' positions are, what their interests are, underlying interests are, and helps them to understand those underlying interests, because they may be blind to that, because they're blinded by their perceptions, their biases, their various other cognitive biases that they may be suffering from. So it's a mediator's job to open their eyes to these realities and show them that, look, this is what is needed by you. So that the mediator does, as you write, again, you said that, through a process of skillful questioning, by paraphrasing, by reframing, by reflecting what the party said, by showing empathy to their, allowing them to vent their emotions. So he understands their fears and concerns, what are their underlying interests, and then helps them to identify their needs. So now that leads to the next question, JP, which I have to put to you. Now we have discussed all this, right? We have discussed about interests, needs, negotiation, and all that. Now, what do you think in a mediation? What do you think would be the most appropriate stage for the mediator to initiate the negotiation process? What role can the mediator play in the negotiation process?
Jawad, having said, people have a tendency to actually jump to bargaining on positions as soon as they are on the table. See, when we begin with parties making their claims in a negotiation, we are trying to distribute the value of a fixed pie.
Yeah.
In distributive negotiation, parties are trying to get the larger piece of the pie, which results in a smaller piece going to the other side. So in a way, one man's gain is another man's loss, and which they call it a zero-sum game. And in actual, it is actually a win-lose situation. When you talk of distributive bargain or a distributive negotiation, because as you rightly put it, we must realize the silent movers behind these claims or positions are their feelings, emotions, fears, and concerns, which help us understand their interests. Now, unless the emotional baggage is shed, parties do not start seeing reason.
Exactly. Yes.
So the first stage in negotiation is the storytelling stage. Now, this is also called performative negotiation stage. Here, parties feel fearful, confused, and unsure of what to do. They feel threatened and victimized by the conduct and claims of the other party. So they are defensive, suspicious, and hostile to the other party, when they begin. And you'll find those stories are emotionally charged. There is no willingness to listen or engage in problem solving. And at those stories, you'll find most of the times they are blame game stories without any way looking at what your contribution is to the problem. Those are you stories. You did this, you are responsible for this, you have made my life hell. So it's all you stories. And this is where monologue happens. It's a one-way street. Now, challenge of the mediator is to create a conversation between the parties in which they take turns in talking and listening, and shift focus from past to present and start the I talk from the you talk. This is the challenge for the mediator. Now, how does mediator help the parties to do that? He helps the parties to be aware of and control their emotions, and finally determine where their interests lie. And he does that by helping them, as you rightly said, that by venting and listening to them empathetically and actively. Those are the right questions, etc., what we talked about. Then the next thing which he does, he increases their self-discipline and self-control. The ground rules that we lay down in the opening statement. Yeah. One person will talk one at a time. And surprisingly, people don't seem to understand that when you say one person will talk and the other person will concede the right to the other person to talk, what have you started doing? Actually, give and take has already started. You are already conceding a position. You are conceding a position to the other side in that conversation. So therefore, the give and take has already begun with your ground rules. And further what he does in exchanging relevant information, without compromising their positions. That's where, like those skills of open-ended questions, you are able to get that relevant information on the table without actually jeopardizing their positions. What else does he do? He fosters respect. You know, when you say language, inappropriate language will not be used. We'll use appropriate language. Will not, you know, and then it in a way actually improves dysfunctional relationship. You know, I feel whenever parties come before the beginning, parties start looking at things differently. When you talk becomes I talk, I what I want, what is my role into the whole of it, the narrative changes. So the transformation happens from the very beginning when parties come in before the mediator. And that's where the mediator helps transform and repair dysfunctional relationship. He helps them to forego blame game. Because answers as to who's right and wrong does not solve any problem.
Yeah.
So he helps them, he tells them, look, let's move from the blame game business to the present and let's look at your future. Then comes, you see, the most important part of the mediator is the stage when he sets up the agenda and the issues and identifies the issues on which negotiation can proceed. That's the very important stage. And let me tell you, often issues are actually, you know, presented as positions or demands or solutions. In a matrimonial dispute, a party wants divorce, a party wants reconciliation. We take them as issues. But those are actually demands. Those are actually positions that the parties have taken. Those are not the issues on which we need to negotiate. What are issues? Issues in a conflict are the topics the parties see as the base of the conflict. What is the basis of their conflict? Those are the issues which they need to actually concentrate on and negotiate. Issues can focus on the content, that is facts, money, contracts, or it can concern the procedure like method of payment, dispute resolution process, time constraints, settlement obstacles, etc. Now, let me explain it to you with an example, because it's very important that we try and reach, because mediator must help parties to reach at the stage where he actually helps to understand what those real issues are. And the example I want to tell you is, you know, in a family mediation, a mother and a teenage son are actually discussing when is the right time for the son to come home at night. The position of the mother is that she wants the son home at 10 every night. The son's position is that it is too early and he wants to stay out until midnight. Now, interests of the mother may be her son's safety, her own fear of being home alone at night, and maybe fear of losing control of her son. Now, so far as son's interest may be retaining independence, I mean, he wants to independently decide for himself, or maintaining reputation amongst his friends. Now, it is not a mama's boy. He's a grown-up guy. He can take decisions on his own. Now, issues may emerge. Now, what are the issues here? We've seen positions, we have seen interest. Issues may emerge. Now, let's see concerning content. What does the son want between 10 to 12? Why does he want to stay out between 10 to 12? And why is the mother so afraid that if the son is out between 10 to 12? That's the real issue so far as content is concerned. Correct. And on procedure, son is not willing to listen, you know, because mostly at that stage, son is not willing to look at any other option. So he's adamant. I want to stay out till 12. The mother has to get back to work soon, so there is a time constraint. She has an early morning, you know, she has to go out for work. Or they may need, there is a problem in, you know, in coming to a solution. They may need the father's help in coming to an agreement. So we must understand the position is, issue is not that the son must be home at 10.
Yeah.
Or the son must be home at 12. Issue is, what is the reason why the son wants to stay out, and what is the fear of the mother if the sun stays out till 12. So therefore, we need to understand, only once we are clear on the issues, can we set the agenda. So as I said, in a matrimonial dispute, the issue is not divorce and a reconciliation. Issues can be plenty. It can be numerous issues between which have given rise to that conflict. What is the difference of opinion about? Why are they at loggerheads with each other? So that it can raise several issues. Now, after issues and interests are clearly identified, now mediator is ready to set the agenda. What does he do? He prioritizes the concerns before exploring the options. Ordinarily, if there is one issue, then you straight away go to the options. But if there are multiple issues, then parties help you to understand what is more important for them. Which is the issue that they want to start talking about first, and which is the issue they want to start talking about next. And they always say when there are multiple issues, ordinarily a mediator would like to begin with an issue which has common interest, which is easily solvable. Because what happens if you are able to resolve an issue, it builds trust in the process. So parties feel good now that they want to discuss the other issues too.
Yeah.
So therefore, you start with an issue which is easily solvable, where there are common interests, which help you to resolve that issue in the first instance. And therefore, with the agenda now set in sight and a clear picture of each party's interests, now mediator guides the parties in exploring options. Now, you talked about the options part. Now, there are 3 steps, there's 3 stages, which are powerful if separated and, examined so far as options are concerned. First, review interest before you actually jump into the option stage. If now your position can be, your question can be, if I've understood you correctly, A needs this, B needs this. Now, if we are able to achieve a solution that meets those interests, would you be satisfied? So what you do is you actually now review really what you are going to work on.
Correct.
Next comes your brainstorming. How do you resolve this? I would like to look both of you to brainstorm a list of possible solutions to this problem. Let's do that. Let's be very creative here, with all ideas welcome. Please hold your comments on the options later when we will evaluate each one. Remember, these are possible ideas, not offers that you will be bound to.
Yeah.
This is how you do a brainstorming. And then they always say the best thing that you can use at this stage is lateral thinking or thinking outside the box. And they always say that judging impedes creativity. You stop judging at that stage. As you rightly said, that it could be ridiculous. Let it be on record. You never know what parties will accept. After all, it's not your problem. It parties dispute. What ultimately suits them, what ultimately suits their interest, they know best. So therefore, let all options come on the table and then brainstorm. Then comes your stage of evaluation. Last step is evaluation of those options. Test them with reality testing or reality checking. That's where you come to it now at this stage. An option which meets the interest of both sides, which they can live with, and which will live, till the time of implementation. And they stay committed to it. So therefore, it's so important, to keep these things in mind. Ordinarily, we jump the moment there is a settlement, as you said, karo, khatam karo, let's move on. Of course, thereafter you have a resolution stage, and resolution stage itself, there can be so many ifs and buts. You need to go over all of them, maybe look at level 2. Even if you have now the solution in place, at the stage of resolution, maybe you need to go to level 2 again. Is there anything that you've left out? Is there anything else that you like to consider? And then, of course, then is the closure stage, when you drop the settlement. So these are the various stages I feel the mediator can help parties, for purposes of resolution of their disputes.
Yeah. So for the purposes of just summing up what you said, JP, would my understanding be correct that the appropriate stage for entering into negotiation would be after you have gathered all the information, after you have distilled the information, understood the parties' interests and needs, then you have identified what are the issues that need to be negotiated upon and what are the issues that need to be resolved between the parties. and only then you enter into the negotiation process. Correct?
And unfortunately, like, even as I said, coming to the grips with the issues itself is a big issue.
That itself will be quite a challenge. Because if you bypass this, as you rightly said, if you bypass this and jump into negotiation straight away, then you will only be negotiating on their positions without understanding what their real interests and needs are. So that is what parties would normally do if they are doing it directly. And that should not be done when you have a mediator there who's trained in this process and who's supposed to be helping them to, identify these interests and needs.
Because
So that's wonderful, JP. I think your example was a very good one.
John, parties, when they actually negotiate on their own, they're actually looking at a fixed pie. As I started with this, so that's why these are unwise settlements and they're not able to move, because they feel if what I am giving up something which the other person gains, and that's why things don't move.
See, to use your example itself of the mother and son, if you see, one is a power-based negotiation, where the mother says you have to come back on time because I'm asking you to do so. I'm your mother, I have a right to tell you this. So power and rights. But if you look at the interests, which you very beautifully explained actually, there's something more than that. It may be concern for the son's welfare. It might be her own safety because she's alone in the night. And also, as a matter of health of the son, because he shouldn't be spending late nights outside with his friends. It can land him in trouble. It can affect his health if he sleeps late. So you see, when you look at the interests, there are so many interests that come and which actually overlap. Because certainly mother is concerned, son would equally be concerned about the mother's safety and would understand why the mother is concerned about his welfare also. So very nice.
Now, having said that, Jawad,
yes,
what would be the core elements that the mediator would have to be aware of? Now, you talked about principled negotiation.
Yeah.
To be aware of to promote principled negotiation between the parties. Now, what should he really be, what are those core elements that he needs to be aware of?
So I've just asked Vikash for permission to share the screen. I just want to show one slide.
Mr. Jawad, we allowed, and
yes.
Other facet was, I just wanted to point out, Mr. Chandok has also joined us.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So I said that we always believed in that. It's commonly said, since it's an art of negotiation, they said 2 is a company, 3 is a crowd. But once a person like Mr. Chandok joins, it's always a more pleasure.
Yeah.
We will unmute him also, and we will have his insights. You have been allowed to do the screen sharing.
Yeah, and one more aspect is when people like Mr. Chandyok join, we become a little nervous.
Certainly. He's guru's
guru. So
we are unmuting him also, and we will ask him to come on video also. And meanwhile, we have allowed you the screen share.
Can we ask Mr. Chandyok for?
Yeah, I will ask.
Yeah.
Mr. Chandyok. Yeah.
Javed and Jawad and JP, I've been listening right from the time that you have been wanting to give your card to JP. I was thinking, why are you not offering to me?
You will have to come on the video first.
That I've just joined. Of course, Vikas has put me in, but it's a real pleasure. It's a great honor, and I'm feeling proud of the fact that I know both of you as legends in mediation today. And it is so, I'm seeing the chat on the screen when people are asking questions, and it looks to me that I think we need to go back the way you are explaining between the 2 cliffs that you gave an example, or JP's example of mother and a son. Now, these are real life examples which makes us understand the principles of mediation. What are we actually doing? What is the role that we are playing? What harmony are we bringing between people? And what kind of negotiations are we wanting to do? And I think the greatest art that I think not only the judges, but lawyers and mediators especially have to learn is the art to listen. It stopped listening. So the son was stopped listening to the mother stopped listening to the son. So listening element is becoming important in today's world. Go on, please. I am not here to interrupt you. Please go on and share the screen.
Thank you, sir. I just want to clarify, sir, why I didn't offer you my car. Though JP is my guru also, but JP is more like a friend. And we are on first name basis, so I don't mind offering my Khatara to him. But I won't dare to offer it to you. That's why.
No, but I thought first part should come to me, because the first Khatara should go to an elder brother or a father rather than going to a younger brother.
It should
Thank
be
you,
the
sir.
other way around, sir. We should be taking your car.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can take my car. I have no problem. I can give to both of you, co-sharers.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
But thankfully, I will just add, it will not be Bekar. He said there is one
Yeah,
Bekar and Bekar. Yes, sir, you can do that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Jawadi's screen sharing you can allow. You allow.
Yeah. So I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. JP, when we talk about the core elements of negotiation, again, I'm going back to Roger Fisher and William Ury. They point out that there are 7 elements in a negotiation. So they say that, the 7 elements, I'll just read them out briefly before I go into each one. First is communication. The second is relationship. Now, these are what are called as connecting elements. What are connecting elements? I'll just explain shortly. Now, then we have alternatives and commitments. So what are the alternatives before the parties? How committed are they to a resolution of the issue that is before? Now, these are the choosing elements. And then we have the interests, the options, and the legitimacy, which are the crafting options. So when a mediator, if a mediator is going for a mediation, then it's very important for a mediator to first and foremost understand what is the relationship of the parties. How important is this relationship? Is it a relationship that is an ongoing one, or is it going to end with this negotiation? Once the mediation is over or the negotiation is over, is it going to end with that? So that information, that knowledge for the mediator is very important, because that helps the mediator to then look at how the communication between the parties is. So how far have they been able to communicate with each other? How far have they been able to understand each other's interests and needs? And then the mediator goes into facilitating that communication between the parties, which you also highlighted. What are the skills and what are the techniques that a mediator uses to establish that communication? Then what the mediator does is examines what is the commitment of the parties. Now that commitment will depend on the alternatives that are available to them, which is, as you said, the BATNA and the VATNA, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So the party, a good negotiator always comes with a strong BATNA. Now, what is the BATNA? What do you mean by best alternative to a negotiated agreement or worst alternative to a negotiated agreement? It is that alternative that the party can invoke or go back to if the negotiation fails. So in reaching a negotiated agreement, if the party is reaching, let's say, conclusion A, that this is how it is going to be resolved and this is what the party is going to get. Now that should be something that is better than his BATNA. When he walks out of this negotiation, if he is going to invoke his BATNA, like let's say, for example, the 2 parties are fighting over maybe a property or something. Okay, now supposing what is the alternative before the party? If the negotiation fails, both the parties are not able to agree upon what is the share that would be equitable and reasonable for both of them to take, something that both of them can live with. If that share, if he is going to go back to the court and he's going to fight in the court and win the case, is he going to get a better share than this? That would be his BATNA. If supposing he's going to go back to court and get a better share, how much time and how much cost is it going to, he's going to incur in getting that better share? And in terms of value, how does it translate into becoming better than what he will be getting through the agreement? That would define his BATNA. His worst alternative would be that he might lose the case before the court, because any litigation is a gamble. Because any litigation, nobody can say for certainty. I always tell my clients, if I tell you that I can 100% win this case for you, I'm a liar. And people, when they pronounce lawyer, they pronounce it as liar sometimes. So, the distinction becomes very blurred at some time in the minds of the parties. So I tell them that I'll be lying to you because you have a strong case, but I cannot tell you that the outcome, because there is an uncertain factor over there. Because what happens basically, whether in a litigation or an arbitration, is there is one neutral third person there also. But unlike in mediation, where the parties are going to use their own intelligence, their own common sense, and their own goodwill to come to a conclusion, there some third party who is not connected with this is going to substitute his or her views in the place of the party's views and say this is what is right and this is what is wrong. So the position of power that a party occupies at the negotiating table is lost when they go back to the court or the arbitration. So therefore, what are the alternatives that are available to them? And if those alternatives are not as good as what they would be getting through this negotiation, that defines their commitment. Now, once we are clear about the connecting elements and the choosing elements, we come to the crafting elements. How do we craft this agreement? That is where, all those 4 points that we discussed about focusing on interests and, generating multiple options and separating the people from the problem. So what are the interests of the parties? What are the options? So multiple options we saw that, it's always it's always wise to come up with multiple options so that parties can see which is the best one, which is acceptable to both of them, something that both of them can live with, something that will be good for both of them. So which satisfies their needs. That is what is called as the Weiss Agreement by Roger Fisher and William Ury. So when you discuss these options, then the question sometimes comes that one party's expectation might be more than what that party actually needs or expects or might be able to get. Now that is where, to test the legitimacy, adoption of the objective criteria comes. Now what is this objective criteria? The objective criteria is the parties have to agree that, okay, we are not able to agree on the price of this or value it because your value is this, my value is this. The gap is very huge. And we are not able to reach a meeting point. Let us do one thing. Let us appoint an independent valuer whom both of us can identify and let that person go and value the property, and that would become the, the market value. Whatever the market value, we'll take his opinion, and that would become the objective criteria. Now here what happens is it is neither the mediator's view nor the party's view. It is the party, it is the view of a person who was objectively valued, an expert in the field who has objectively valued something and given his opinion on that. So there it acquires an element of legitimacy. So these become the crafting elements which the parties can then come to use to reach an agreement. So in a negotiation process, what is important for the mediator to remember, apart from various other, understanding, giving giving an opportunity for them to speak out, understanding their fears and concerns, understanding their interests and needs, are to be conscious of this at all times, that there are these elements which can help you to craft an agreement that would be acceptable to both the parties. So the mediator's job would be to examine the relationship, establish communication between the parties that would be safe, that would be, that the parties can do in a proper manner without really offending each other or without hurting each other. Then help them to examine what are their alternatives and what kind of commitment which they can bring into the table, so that whatever agreement that they reach would be a durable one, which would be sustainable, which would help them to carry it forward, not come back and then, as you said rightly, that sometimes, even at the stage of reaching an agreement, some problem may come up and the parties may say, oh, this is not acceptable to us. Or, sometimes the apology becomes an issue, as we have seen in many mediations, where in the last minute parties say, no, he has to say sorry to me for whatever he has done. So this kind of situations, to avoid that, if the mediator is conscious of all these factors and takes into consideration this while guiding the parties towards resolution, then what happens? The negotiation becomes a smooth process and can lead to a sustainable agreement between the parties that would last for some time or a long time. Okay. So I hope that answers the question.
This is beautifully explained, Jawad. And
Thank you,
I think
JP.
Connects a lot of things, which ordinarily, I would like to tell parties in a negotiation. Actually, these are the 7 things which you need to remember. And,
Yes,
and
I think every mediator. Yeah.
And what I did, is sometimes you don't. We gave it a acronym, CRYOLAC.
CRYOLAC.
Like CERELAC. So I've given it an acronym, CRYOLAC. Communication, relationship, interest, options, legitimacy, alternatives, and commitment. CRYOLAC.
Oh, great. Easy to remember now.
Yes.
Yeah.
You remember cow's lip we had in school, like in physics, chemistry, people remember physical properties of a gas. Now it was very difficult to remember what are those physical properties that you're referring to.
Yes,
so our teacher gave us this cow's lip. C was color, O was odor, W was weight, S was solubility, L is litmus, I was ignition, P is other properties. I still remember.
My God, you still remember that. I've forgotten chemistry.
How acronyms can help you to remember things.
I studied jurisprudence like that with the help of acronyms. Okay. Now, that brings us to another situation that can possibly arise in a mediation, JP. Because sometimes, parties become very entrenched in their positions, and that leads to an impasse in the mediation. So how can the mediator move them forward and deal with the impasse? Now, are there any, cognitive biases that a mediator needs to be aware of while dealing with the impasse situation?
Well, Jawad, yes, but first of all, let's understand what is impasse. One author says it's actually a misnomer to say that parties reach an impasse during the mediation process. They are already in a stage of impasse. That's why they came to you. See, when it comes to, they were already, otherwise they would have resolved their dispute. They are already in a state of impasse.
Exactly.
So therefore, it's not that the impasse has occurred in mediation. That's a deadlock situation where you find parties are actually not moving at all. And I remember, when you say what are the skills that a mediator needs to move them, in one of our mediation trainings, that this person was acting as the role play as a mediator. And he said, sir, it was very easy to take parties till the information gathering stage. Thereafter, I was blank. I didn't know what to do. I had all that information and I didn't know now what to do. So therefore, of course, it's a big, because as I pointed out to you, the most important stage after you have all those facts is to set out those issues and the agenda before you actually move on. And so therefore, these are skills which you do need. And that's why training, and you need to be trained. Now, it is important to understand, Jawad, as to why the impasse has occurred. Why parties are not moving from their position. So first, before you give a prescription, you prescribe a medicine, you must know the malady. And that's therefore, what is the cause for the impasse is important to understand. And there could be 3 situations. Emotional impasse, it could be substantive impasse, and it could be procedural impasse. Now, when we talk of emotional impasse, we are all human beings. As you said, person and problem getting mixed up. In a bitter dispute, feelings play a more important role than talk. And behind those emotions may be personal animosity, could be mistrust, desire for vengeance, pride, ego, fear of losing face, fear of change, and so on. There could be so many things which, do not permit parties to move on. An experienced mediator needs to diagnose the cause by appropriate communication techniques, by building trust, we talked about, permitting venting, empathizing, and actively listening to the cues. They will give you the hints. They will tell you where they are stuck. But it is for you to listen. It's so important to listen to them. Then it could be a case of substantive impasse. There could be lack of information. Parties want to buy time, as it doesn't presently have the resources. I mean, they feel that, go back to the court, I'll be able to get 2 years, 3 years, and then maybe I'm in a better position to pay back. Then there could be lack of preparation. As I told you, if you're not prepared, you don't know where you are headed, or bargaining power. You may lack bargaining power, or there could be involvement of third parties. Then it could be standing on principles.
Yeah.
And ignoring reality and so on. So these could be various reasons, and it is for you at that time, you need to bring parties as a mediator on the same page. Sometimes you need support from their lawyers, and also you need to empower parties to look for the reality testing, the objective criteria. Sometimes presence of third parties may be important. You can send for those third parties, you can request for their presence, who actually hold the key to the problem. We have also found instances where, creation of gender balance in terms of having joint or co-mediation helps in matrimonial disputes. At times there is lack of trust in a mediator. And you can substitute a mediator with an experienced one, or you can add another mediator who's a more experienced one along with the mediator who's actually mediating. And we've seen now in online mediations, actually, there can be a question of confidentiality. I've had instance where, there were certain issues involved, and in spite of being told that, nobody is recording, the party was not willing to move. He said, "No, sir, unless there is a physical environment I don't trust, and I'm not willing to divulge that information online." So therefore, there could be several reasons. Now, the techniques that we can actually use, you said one of them, BATNA. See, for purpose of reality testing, your best tool to shift parties is to explore whether they have considered their BATNA. Check on their BATNA. You need to check on their BATNA. Do they have a BATNA? And the best way to do that, besides what you've already talked about, is to, one of the methods is to compare it to the pending settlement offer with the best outcome at trial. Keeping in mind legal expenses, risk of losing and delay.
Yeah.
As you rightly said that we don't value time. Then you can work on BATNA. Compare the pending settlement offer to the worst projected outcome at trial. But you can put it in positive terms. If you settle now, see how much you'll save. Instead of saying how much, see, ordinarily I've seen mediators telling, itne din lag jayenge, so many years you'll spend, how much of money you'll spend. Why can't you put it in a positive term and say, look, see, this much time you'll save, this much money you will save, this much cost you will save. Why not settle now? So BATNA can be put in a positive sense instead of putting it very negative. You rightly talked about cognitive biases. If a person gives a transparent offer, as you said, you disclose your bottom line, I would still think there must be something in it for you. Kuch to hoega, kuch to iska fayda hoga. Not what I'm getting from the market. I'm getting a 3 lakh, concession. But I am thinking, what are you getting in this?
Yeah.
That's those cognitive biases, psychological biases that come into play. When parties are very transparent. And sometimes, parties, if a direct offer comes from the other side, you do not trust the source. Because since he's saying, and therefore I'm not willing to accept it. And actually, there's one more thing that happens, another bias that you need to be aware of, that is reactive devaluation, which comes from the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the distrust of the source. And all these things you can, actually obviate by changing the messenger.
Yeah.
Instead of the information going directly from one party to the other, the information comes to the mediator, and the mediator uses his own training, his own skills, how he puts it across to the other side. What if the other party agrees to this? What if this is available on the table? Would you accept it? Instead of saying that, he's agreed to 9 or he's agreed to 12. So therefore, you change the messenger. The information does not go.
Yeah.
And therefore, you are able to take care of this bias. Then you can do a role reversal. Now, in a mediation technique, where you tell the parties, this actually tests their creativity. You invite one of the parties to suggest a solution that would meet the interest of the other parties. You know, you ask one of the parties, what is it that would meet his needs and interests? Can you come out with some solution? It tests his creativity. So you can do a role reversal. Instead of what you want, put yourself into the other person's shoes. Tell us, what is it that he will accept? Then you can, of course, objective criteria we've already talked about, because that helps neither your decision nor my decision. Let's go to a third party who will actually give us the right choice. So, we can also test objective criteria by saying, if this option is put in place, how would it work for you? We can say, does it meet both your needs? We can say, will this agreement work for you throughout its period? These are all reality testing questions which you can put to the parties. Another thing, cognitive bias is endowment effect. This is something different than the seller-buyer usual thing. Seller wants to, buy it at the lowest minimum price. Buyer wants the highest price. That's always is there. But endowment effect is something different because I own it. So for me, the property is valued much more, and the buyer feels, this is something which I'm, saying something not because it's the real market value, but because it belongs to me. Therefore, I have actually jacked it up. And this ordinarily happens. Something, it's a lucky house for me. It's a lucky car for me. You have your own reasons for, jacking the price. So it's not just the seller-buyer issue. It's actually the endowment effect which comes in when you find that the price is disproportionately high. Then anchoring. Anchoring is actually, they always say the first information will determine as to what your judgment finally is going to be in the entire, negotiation process. And they say the way to overcome is to give your own first offer, so that you can guide the negotiation in the way that you want it to go.
True.
But sometimes the other party may do it. Other party may come out with his first offer. What happens if the offer is very, very low? Then you feel, no, this negotiation is going to be tough. But the way to test it, if the other side has given the first offer, is to test it with your partner.
I think if I may just interrupt for a minute, JP. I
Yes,
think
go
that anchoring bias, one of the most, practical examples would be that, let's say if I'm going to buy a shoe, now the price is there already. Okay, so whatever bargaining that would take place would be only around that price. It can't be something which will be completely different from the price that is quoted over there. I think that's a very good example of the anchoring bias that you are talking about.
Because they have taken the first step.
Yes, so the first offer, once somebody makes a first offer, the entire negotiation will revolve only around that.
And, because if it is the first offer is generous, which way the whole thing will move. But if the first offer is actually ridiculous, which move. So in your mind, you have made up your mind already, judgment.
Exactly.
You already formed the judgment as to which direction this negotiation will actually go. That's what. So therefore, it's good to make the first offer instead of waiting for the other side to give the offer first. Then reactive devaluation we talked about. Then one method that you can use is deferring. You can defer it for another day. And there are several issues. You can deal with. Let's say there are several issues. One issue, parties have got stuck. You can defer that issue, park it, move on to the next issue. And once you actually resolve it, it will become easier for you to come back to this issue, as I said, and then come back to it. Or you can defer the whole session, say we'll meet after lunch, defer it by an hour, so that parties, rethink the whole thing. Or maybe if you find the parties are still entrenched and they're not moving in their position, you should defer it for another day. So that let them think over it and then come back to it. Yeah. So these are various methods, I feel, Jawad, which you can use for purposes of,
overcoming
breaking impasse.
Yeah.
And impasse is something which will occur. I mean, when that person said, "Look, sir, I was blind," he was not joking. And an experienced person, he said, like, "Sir, I was finding it so difficult to move parties. I didn't know what to do." And therefore we say sometimes, Jawad, that this 40-hour training is just not enough. You don't become a mediator just because you've got a 40-hour certification.
Yeah.
There is lots more to learn and lots more to gone with, so far as the practical aspect is concerned.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
And Jawad, I mean, given you all these particular aspects, now since we talked about this aspect, about when parties are in difficult situations, now how does a mediator deal with these difficult situations? And you feel, these kind of situations can be best handled in a joint session or a private session?
JP, it's my personal view, because from the discussion that you have already we had, what you have said now about the various biases, about doing the reality checks, about the BATNA, VATNA, all these aspects. Now, what happens if you do it in a joint session? Can a mediator do a reality check, for instance, or a BATNA and VATNA with a party in front of the other party? What would happen? Naturally,
Jawad, sorry, I came in on this with you because some people feel that actually there should not be private sessions. Mediation should be always held in a joint, and they feel it is unfair to look at private sessions. So in that particular light, I was thinking, how do you go about this situation?
No, I think, you're right. But there are, many styles of mediation where some people really feel, that it has to be done only in a joint session. Now, in some jurisdictions, like, for example, if you take the US or Australia or such places, in a commercial negotiation, sometimes, parties, they prefer actually what happens is the mediator's role is very limited over there, which is only a sort of an intervention now and then, just to sum up things or to, maybe, place things in a proper perspective for the benefit of the parties. Now, that demands a very high level of maturity from the parties. But in our context, where, many times we have to deal with parties who may not be legally aware, or who may not really understand the process, or who may not be comfortable, discussing things in front of each other, because there might be a lot of confidential information that you may need to get from the parties. There may be a lot of, the reality check that we need to do, test their BATNA and VATNA. Now, what happens is, if the mediation fails, where do the parties stand? Are we compromising the interests of those parties if we are going to test the reality in the presence of the other party? Now, there might be a lot of, confidentiality that might be involved over there. Now, how do we do that in a joint session? But because that is where I feel, that I don't really agree with the concept of doing the entire mediation in a joint session. I feel that at some stages we need to have those private sessions with the parties to put them at ease, to maybe show a little more empathy towards the party who might be needing it more than the other party. And if you're going to do that in a joint session, it is going to affect your neutrality, or the perception of neutrality that would be there in the minds of the parties. So considering all these things, I feel, my personal view, every participant here in this webinar is entitled to differ with me. Okay. My personal view is there are a lot of things that we need to do in a private session without jeopardizing the parties' interests, without putting the parties in a compromising position in the presence of the other party. So therefore, my feeling is that it is important that we need to have those private sessions, and particularly in the negotiation process, because where you spoke about the various cognitive biases, reactive devaluation, for instance. In supposing Vikash and I are negotiating and you're the mediator, and I'm telling Vikash that, look, Vikash, I'm willing to offer 10 lakhs to you. And Vikash says, who the hell are you to offer me 10 lakhs? Because it's coming from me. Okay, Vikash may not like it. So that is where the reactive devaluation sets in. And then the anchoring bias and the various other cognitive biases that you spoke about. There's also a winner's dilemma. If Vikash tells me that I can give you 9 lakhs and I accept it, I enter into the agreement, then I go back thinking, did I make a mistake? Maybe I could have pitched it a little higher. Maybe I could have asked for more. So to avoid all this, my feeling is it's better that a mediator does what is called as plays the role of a shuttle diplomat, go between the parties, ascertain where they stand, understand what the final offer is, and then take the offer to the other person. Then what happens is all these, the possibility of all these biases, coming up and, sabotaging the process or derailing the process can be avoided. That is my personal opinion. I feel that, private session is the best place where you can do all these things, including the brainstorming and all those other exercises. Because parties may hesitate to make an offer in the presence of the other person, or they may deliberately make an offer which will become the anchor for the, for the entire negotiation. If the party is a good negotiator, is a strong negotiator, they may make an offer which would be so ridiculous, but that becomes the anchor. And they will say that, no, it is nowhere near what I am expecting. So therefore, all those to avoid those biases, I feel that, private session would be really useful to develop the consensus between the parties.
I think, Jawad, we are already
We are way past our time, I think.
party time.
Yeah. Because do we have your permission, or is there time for one last question to JP? Very briefly, I would request JP to answer that. A very simple question. What are the ethical principles that a mediator needs to ensure while facilitating the negotiation?
Jawad, I think we've already answered all that. When we talked about neutrality, fairness, equality, respect, treating parties fairly, giving them a right to make their own choice. That's what mediation is about, giving respect. When we make parties sit on the same table, like, it could be a workman versus the management. We make them sit on the same table. We talk to them equally, give them equal time. So that builds up that, being fair to both sides. Neutrality is about being fair, confidentiality,
Absolutely.
maintaining confidentiality of the process. Now, these are aspects, I think, which we've already talked about.
Yes. Okay.
So therefore, in that sense, and I'm sure most of our mediators, like people who are already mediating, are aware of these principles, and they need to, like the Arbitration Act already has, if you see, the aspect of fairness is already, now put there statutorily. I'm sure maybe someday you'll have a Mediation Act where they will put in, the ethics of a good.
All of you are working on that, so hopefully that fructifies very soon.
Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, I'm sure.
I think we come to the end, Vikash. Sorry, we have exceeded the time. I think we have.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Apologies to
I'm
all.
just reminded, in the way the phrases are being sovereign, I'm just reminded of the famous song "Abhi jaane ki jidd na karo, abhi to dil bhara nahi." The two songs, two lines in a different way.
Abhi na jao chhod kar ke dil abhi bhara nahi.
That's what I'm saying. I was surprised. They say that while you're in a virtual court or when you are having a virtual webinar, you cannot actually get emotionally attached. It's just a virtual platform, as we say. But once there are two speakers who are erudite, I can see that it's a dinner time, but the way you interacted, all are glued with that. And we can all say, we are just Monica writing down, that during these testing times, as they say, rainbow after the rains, or a whiff of fresh air after the bad days. That's what I'm saying. Now, the only two questions I will take, because I think we have exceeded our limit and everything has been quite elaborately been explained. I think we shouldn't take the questions as such because it's quite elaboratively explained. It's dinner time, and I remember that there was a composition by Shankar Mahadevan which was very hit, which said Jugalbandi. But I never realized that there could be three J's in life, that is Jawad, JP Sen, and Jugalbandi of both of you, to actually give us an insights and negotiation in a lighter vein we can part of. They say that what you both of you told us, that a client comes to a lawyer and says, I want to settle a fees. And in his wisdom, at the back of the mind, like all professionals do, he feels, let me quote a 55,000 fees, and probably the client will settle. He takes out at that point of time 2,000 notes, counts 55,000, it's a 1 lakh packet. He gives 55,000 to him. The lawyer at the back of the mind feels, oh, he was mentally prepared for 1 lakh. Why did Bush I just asked for 55,000? Next time, after 1 or 2 years, that client comes, he remembers that that particular client who had actually mentally been prepared for 1 lakh. I should ask this time 1.5 so that he gives me 1.5. 1 lakh. He says this time it's 1. He says, Bauji, that time it was 55 and then when I was prepared for 1 lakh. But this time I'm mentally prepared for 55. So this time I will give you 25,000. So the art of negotiation is an art which not only a lawyer or a professional of life one learns. And thank you to Mr. Sen and Mr. Chandok and Mr. Jawad. I'm just reminded when 3 gurus come, even Mr. Kabir never realized that it could be when he said that when the guru is before me, whether I should bow before the guru or before the God, he said I should bow before the guru because he has given the enlightenment. And same way when we have 3 gurus, Mr. Chandok, Mr. Sen and Mr. Jawad. So it becomes very, very different.
Vikash, sorry to interrupt you. Just one correction in what you said now. There are 2 gurus and 1 disciple. Okay, so
we have, before we part for the day, when Mr. Chandok is there, and let's have his parting shots. Like we used to say that when there is Mahendra Singh Dhoni, the parting shot of the 6 in a helicopter style used to be his. And so when we have Mr. Chandok with us, we should have a parting shot at the victory stroke for today by Mr. Chandok.
I have only to say, I was only wondering that you're talking about food, which comes within Article 21 of the Constitution, of course, because life comes with food. But why sitting in Chandigarh are we forgetting something more important than that, which is that we have to start something early at 7:30, then go to dinner early. That's also part of it. And it's reminding me, Jawad and JP, an instance when I was arguing before a court and I said their time is coming when probably my own son will probably file a petition before your lordships to say that my father tells me to sleep early and get up early to bed and early to rise, what our parents taught us. And that's violative of my constitutional right to sleep when I want to sleep and when I want to sleep. In such situation, I can assure the audience, mediation may still work because you might be able to bring even a resolution, even in this kind of dispute. Time is coming when we need to look at every aspect of our life, where we can look at only one thing: how do we resolve? We have started our mediation process now with our Madhyam, right from schools today. And I am honor and pride to tell you that these 2 legends that you have heard today, they are already joining hands to bring you something more stronger in mediation in times to come. And probably on the international front, you will find today, where I always keep saying this because that I have not found any country in the world where lawyers of some reputed law firms do not have an Indian lawyer. And I can assure you time is not very far when you will find Indian mediators are actually in demand internationally, are in demand to resolve disputes on cross-border, commercial or non-commercial. Time is not far. Therefore, all my friends who are part of the audience, who have participated, thank you so much for giving us all this opportunity. And I am actually an intruder through Vikas to come into it.
Not at all, sir. It's always a pleasure. They say that the cake is best when there is a cherry on the top.
So therefore, I'm grateful to Vikas for giving me this opportunity. And I think hearing my 2 friends made me proud of the fact that we were able to sow the seed of mediation in 2006. And today it is growing up into a plant. And I'll soon see a tree of mediation all over the country, which will start giving shade to all conflicts in our lives. Thank you, each one of you. Have a nice time. Grateful to all of you. Have a great time. Pray for you and your families. In these trying times, you must all be safe and protected. Remain healthy, remain happy. Thank you very much.
So before we part, tomorrow in the series of the webinars which we have been conducting, tomorrow the session would be by Mr. P.K. Mittal, who is the company secretary, come advocate, who is a former Central Council member, GST and overview. So do stay connected with us tomorrow at 5 p.m. and Mr. Jawad and Mr. Chandok and Mr. Sen, only fact that we connect today at 7 p.m., which we have normally not done, not even normally, we have not done, and still the people are being glued, shows that people are receptive when you actually do that. They negotiate with the time, as they say that a time is like a gas. It occupies the space and the vessel which you give in. So once there are good speakers, people actually accommodate with the time, negotiate with the time, and then move forward. And thank you everyone, those who have connected with us live on the Facebook as well as on the webinar, and ultimately when we upload this video on our channel of Beyond Law CLC. Do stay safe, connected, and like in law they say, I can only say what Mr. Chandok has said, I agree. And that is a rare opportunity when an assisting counsel can say that I have an opportunity to say I agree. And a parting shot by Mr. Jawad, and then we call it for the day.
My gratitude to you, Vikash, for this opportunity, and a special word of thanks to JP for the wonderful, as you rightly said, the Jugalbandi that we could establish here. Thank you so much. It was a real honor to share the stage with him, actually, because I remember in 2008, he had come to Chennai to train us in mediation. So I can't imagine a bigger honor than sharing the stage with him. And especially to Mr. Chandyok for taking time off. And as he rightly said, 7:30, well past 7:30, he has been with us till 8:30, and it's going to be 8:35 now. So I don't want to stand between him and his mandatory nightcap. So thank you very much, everyone, especially all the participants, for your wonderful participation, for your cooperation, and for being with us throughout till the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sen, Mr. Chandyok, and Mr. Jawad, and all the participants. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay blessed. Namaskar. Good night.
Good night.